Good evening, Jamie. Good evening, Gary. Before we start this discussion, I would just like to convey our three, and indeed everybody at Sky Sports, sincere condolences to the Manchester City coach, Pep Guardiola, who sadly lost his mother today to the coronavirus disease. Our thoughts aren't just with him, indeed everybody who has lost a loved one at this time. Of course, the coronavirus has affected the whole world and is affecting football too. And how football is dealing with it is a matter of some hot debate right now. There seemingly is no agreement at the moment in sight between players and clubs with regard to wage cuts or indeed deferrals. Gary, I want to start with you. How much do you think that before talks had even taken place, there was a bad tone set by the manner in which the talks were put forward by various parties?
Look, it's a complex issue, Geoff. I think for a start, that we're talking about football being stopped now for 3 weeks. I think football should have dealt with this a lot quicker. Me and Jamie did a program, I think 2.5, 3 weeks ago, where one of the last programs that we did, where we said there was a huge opportunity here for football to set the tone. It's such an important part in people's lives. It's such an important part of what England transports around the world. Billions of people watch it, and there was a really strong chance that if football set the tone, then everybody else would follow and do the right things. I think what we saw at the end of last week was the start of an unsavoury episode over the weekend. I think the Premier League caught the players by surprise, put them on the back foot, asking for a 12-month reduction in pay at 30% without any pre-warning. The players, whilst maybe not the finance experts of this country, they understand and are sharp enough to understand and streetwise enough to understand that they won't have the wool pulled over their eyes. And I think that the players fall into a group of different categories. You've got a group of players that are out of contract in 3 months, who maybe the last 3 months of pay they're going to receive before they probably have no income for the foreseeable future. You've got a group of players who are potentially going to get relegated and would take significant wage cuts anyway come July. You've got a group of players who would be looking at billionaire owners of clubs and thinking, well, you bought the club for a low amount and you're going to sell it for a large amount, and it would be a little bit of pain that you'd have to suffer, so you should put your money in. And then there may be a group of players who want to support their clubs and want to maybe do a little bit of a wage reduction. I think the first thing that I would say is that players do want to contribute to the National Health Service, to the lower leagues, to the non-playing staff, and ensure that their money does go somewhere that is helpful to the people that they want to support. So I think that the Premier League, if you want to bring people on a journey with you to try and take a wage cut, you've got to land that softly. I think trying to bully them by announcing it on a mid-afternoon on a Friday and then calling them into a meeting on a Saturday in front of their managers and owners is not probably the best way to land the blow as hard as that would have been to the players.
Jamie, what are your observations?
I think mine is slightly different from Gary. I think a lot of players do a lot of good, and I think a lot of them have their own charitable foundations, and a lot of people help with things that we possibly don't hear about. And that's where they can help the NHS, or the foundations help local sick kids, or lots of different things. It's not the job of Premier League players to fund the NHS. I know the situation we're in right now. I'm not sure if the players all got together and put a fund together and that money was sent to the NHS, that would help the NHS right now. It might help the NHS in the future, but I'm sure at this moment, everything that the government have got is getting put in there to try and help the NHS. We never think it's enough, and the problem is they're not getting the equipment that they need fast enough. I'm not sure the footballers can change that right now. I think what's happened of late is there's been talk of different footballers doing different things. So we've heard about Jordan Henderson, maybe James Milner. I've heard Troy Deeney's name, Kevin De Bruyne, Harry Maguire at Manchester United. Lots of different players are getting mentioned about doing certain things. Now, it seems to have come out of this PFA meeting that the players are upset that they would have to lose some of the money, and the money would go, in essence, back to the clubs. I don't agree with that. I think the money should, in some ways, go back there, because you got to think, how do players get paid? There's three ways players get paid. It would be through the TV, the money from the TV, the money through the turnstile, not as much now as it was 20, 30 years ago, and probably advertising money. All those revenue streams have stopped for football clubs. Now, the wages players are getting now, some are getting nearly £200,000 or £300,000 a week, and this is not an ex-professional here. Good luck to them, deserve everything they get. But I don't believe that football clubs and football owners actually make hundreds of millions each season. We see that in their accounts. We see that basically a lot of them break even. A lot of them lose money every year. There's only Tottenham and Liverpool the last year or two because they got the Champions League final. So I don't think it's too much to ask that players maybe do defer some wages to the later maybe time, are asked to actually contribute a little bit to the clubs. Really, there's no way the Premier League as one are going to come together and everyone's going to agree on it. Every club is different in a different situation. There's no way owners at the bottom of this division can afford, I don't think, certainly, to just be handing out hundreds of thousands of pounds each week to certain players. So I'm not saying it has to be 30%, but I think every club's situation is different, and they as a club have to get together. Forget these conference calls and captains of each clubs. That's never going to work. It has to be your own players at your own club. So if that's my club, if you like, Jordan Henderson, in a room speaking to players, and again, not everyone will agree, but I don't feel it's right where maybe players are saying, okay, we want our money to go to charity. Listen, that's fantastic if they want it to go into help people. But there is a lot of clubs in this, even in the Premier League, and people may not believe it because of the money we hear bandied about of TV deals, who will find it difficult if this continues for any later time. And God forbid, if there is no games played this season and there's no TV money for these clubs will be really, really struggling, I'm sure of it, even at the top.
Gary,
Geoff, can I just add to Jamie's point, please? I agree with Jamie in the sense that I think that it's reasonable that the players should contribute to their clubs. I'm talking about how you get to that point and how you deliver it to them. You know, releasing it in a statement publicly, releasing it in a public statement on a Friday afternoon saying, you know, will you all take a 12-month pay at 30% is not the way to go about doing a deal. So from my point of view, I agree with Jamie. I think the clubs will need support. I mean, at every level, clubs will need support. I'm looking at it in two phases. There is April, May and June, which I think the clubs will have had most of the revenues for this season, excepting in the Premier League. They're going to have to finish the fixtures to get the broadcast money or keep the broadcast money. Where I think it gets really bad quite quickly is if it goes into July, August, September, October for clubs, where that does become quite precarious and the finances of the football clubs will really suffer. And I do think at that point it would be reasonable for the players to contribute to their own club's individual finances. I'm talking here, I don't think it was handled well publicly to be able to, if you like, put that statement out on a Friday afternoon and call the players to a meeting on the Saturday is, I think, the wrong way to go about trying to get those cuts from players.
Gary, do you think there's also been, as well, to a degree, because of the profile of football, a mixing of emotions and messages here? Because players taking wage cuts, which there would appear to be from a number of quarters a call for, does not benefit the NHS. In fact, the wage cut, it's a less tax, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to what the government are putting in, you know, hundreds of billions of pounds, this is directly to do with the clubs and the way the clubs operate their business, the same as any other businesses in the world right now who are suffering serious financial difficulties. This is not to do with so-called players, or I don't even like using the word greedy players, not doing their bit or not helping the NHS. How this has been conflated is a real misnomer, is ridiculous.
Geoff, I think what you've got to understand, though, and you do understand it, is that football will be judged, and we want it to be judged differently because the power that it has to influence people is enormous. Those lads that go out onto the pitch, those football clubs, those badges are steeped in history. They mean so much. They're the hope and joy of every single fan of those clubs every single weekend around the world. So the idea that we don't want football to be judged differently, we do want football to be judged differently. There was an opportunity here for football to do an amazing thing. And me and Carragher were on television 2 or 3 weeks ago saying we know that talks will be being put in place between the different parties, the stakeholders, the EFL, the Premier League, the PFA, the LMA. The supporters should be involved as well, obviously. And there was an opportunity to do something fantastic. What we saw on Friday afternoon was a collaboration potentially of a couple of weeks, but then I thought the Premier League went solo. They didn't increase the funding for the EFL and non-league clubs. They advanced monies forward, but didn't give them any extra funding, which those clubs so desperately need. They give a £20 million contribution to good cause, which is welcome, but I think it could have been more. They asked players for a 30% pay cut, which equated to around £550 million. I think there was an opportunity for the Premier League to stand tall and do a number of things. One was to distribute good cause quickly to good cause. Two was to provide more funding for clubs that need it in the EFL and non-league, and to increase funding. To go to the players and have meaningful discussions with the captains of the clubs around how they could work together to support not just the local cause, but the national cause and also the club cause, which is critical because the clubs need to survive. And they've not been able, no one has been able to bring together football. There hasn't been a leader that's been able to bring together football in this time to come up with the right solution.
But don't forget, Gary, when you talk about the Premier League is the 20 clubs. It's not a mythical body that operates and then tells the clubs what to do. It is the 20 clubs themselves.
And Geoff, what we're seeing is the main structural flaw in English football, where I've called for government intervention for many, many years to reset English football so that essentially we have the most amazing Premier League. But, Geoff, if you've got the bottom club in the Premier League gaining £100 million of broadcast money and the top club in the EFL, Leeds United, so Norwich City get 100 million and the top club in the EFL get 3 million, you must see the disconnect and the disproportionate financial reward that's basically put through football. It needs resetting, and it has needed resetting for 10 or 15 years. And maybe out of this crisis, there can be a government intervention to create a better game whereby if a crisis like this comes along again, football looks after everybody rather than just looking after the 20 clubs which are voting for their own positions.
Jamie, when we talk about as well that there was potential to do a lot of good, how much do you feel amongst the wider public there is a mistrust in football in this matter, which in itself is hugely damaging?
Well, I think footballers' wages has always been a stick to beat footballers with. It was in our day. I mean, the wages have gone even bigger now. And as I said earlier in my first answer, good luck to them. There's people who earn lots of money in different areas, different sports, never mind different areas. I mean, the fact that someone as part of the government come out and sort of attack footballers, and to be honest, I had a little bit of sympathy with him at first in that I think he was asked a question and he gave an answer. He then followed it up a few days later, which probably annoyed me more than anything because I thought it was out of order early on, the first answer that he gave, but he was asked the question, he did answer, but he, as I said, he followed it up. And you'd actually think of some of the people throughout the country who actually fund his own party. You know, what are they doing to actually help people, really? There's millions getting swilled about when there's an election on at any time. So footballers are always there. I don't actually think him coming out, Matt Hancock, and attacking footballers actually hate footballers that much. I think it was probably a good thing for footballers because so many people came out then and backed footballers and pointed the finger in different directions at so many other people within society, and rightly so. But it does feel now there is a focus, we're talking about it tonight, on what Premier League footballers are going to do. And I think Premier League footballers have got a great opportunity here. And what they can do now, as I said before, I think they do have to help the clubs. Yes, of course, they'll be hurt in some way financially. But this is a chance to do something good for the greater good of the country and players being involved. And whether you like it or not, we talk about footballers and role models, or they're not role models. That always comes up for debate. Whether you like it or not, people look to footballers And I said very early on, when this pandemic started, that we shouldn't be ashamed in saying we miss football. We can't wait for football to come back because it's so important in so many people's lives and mine, and especially. So footballers also have to grasp that. So people will look to footballers, and as I said, they've got an opportunity. Everyone's in a different financial situation. Gary mentioned at the start that some players' contracts might be up, some players are on more money, some people are at the end of the career, some people are at the start of the career. But they do have an opportunity here to put something out there and show the nation or the world. Let's not forget Barcelona, Messi, I think Juventus, Ronaldo, Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund. These clubs have all got the ball rolling there.
I mean,
And I think a lot of footballers of late have had almost pats on the back when I'm reading the press in these last few days about what certain players are doing. No one's actually done nothing yet as a group. So I think it is a great opportunity for them. Again, I said it can't all be the 20 clubs. Each club's got to be individual, decide with the top people at the club. But it is a great opportunity. And yes, footballers are taking a little bit of stick, but they now have a great opportunity to do something good. And I just feel it's an opportunity they've got to take. And the longer this goes on, where it's Gordon Taylor coming against the Premier League, then it's the FA, then it's the clubs, and different clubs are doing different things. It just sort of doesn't look right. This, I know it's not easy. Gary's probably involved in negotiations more than me being involved in a club, but this needs a resolution, I think, in the next week or so, really, because the longer it prolongs, the more it'll be greedy footballers don't want to pay any money.
Gary, do you think also as well it's important to see that some footballers, not all, not by any stretch of the imaginations, they are indeed high net worth individuals. The clubs, helping their clubs and also helping the NHS or good causes or hospices are completely separate things, but they're also not mutually exclusive. Player, like any employee, and we talk about the players. It must stress the whole time. We talk about footballs now because it's the industry where we work in. But this applies to virtually every industry, particularly high net worth individuals. They can look at their circumstances in terms of the business they work for, because all businesses have got to readjust, and on the back of that, based on their position, whether or not they are in a position to do some good and help in a community which is clearly in crisis right now. The two are separate things, but in a strange way, they're connected.
Geoff, they're very separate things. But I said a few weeks ago, look after the health and priority of the players, the fans, the staff. That's now happening. Give economic reassurance to the lower leagues, the clubs, the players, and that was the second thing. And then the third thing was try and do something good outside of what would be your own business, which is your football club in this particular case. There was an opportunity here for football to wrap a deal up, and the Premier League, and that's what the Premier League tried to do on Friday afternoon. They tried to wrap a deal up. They tried to position a deal to the public, which in the initial phase got quite a bit of credit. People praised the deal. We're giving 20 million to good cause. We're going to give 125 million to the Football League, and we're going to ask for a 30% player reduction to allow us to be sustainable. The problem they have is that they didn't bring the other stakeholders on the journey with them, and they went out early, publicly, and for players, they weren't brought along on the journey. The players, I think, if you went to them, a lot of them would probably say, yeah, I'll contribute to good cause, and I'll also contribute to my club at the right time. But they went about it the wrong way, Geoff.
Gary, apologies. I need to interrupt you with some breaking news. Jamie, I'd like your reaction first. Liverpool have reversed their decision to apply for the government furlough scheme. Your reaction to that, because you were critical of them.
Yes, I was, and my hope was that there was enough time that they would reverse this decision. It was. I was very angry when the decision came through. I'll tell you why I was angry, because I think at this moment it's fair to say Liverpool are the holders of the European Cup, the top of the league, world champions. They sort of tick so many boxes where probably people who are not Liverpool fans probably look at Liverpool now as some sort of model to sort of try and replicate about how they've gone about things, the manager and the club. And to get something so badly wrong, I mean, I could not believe it. I don't think any football club should do what Liverpool did a couple of days ago. I was embarrassed as a Liverpool fan. I know there was two clubs before Liverpool, I think, in Spurs and Newcastle. In some ways, I didn't like what those clubs did, but I expected it. And I think the football world expected it from probably Daniel Levy and Mike Ashley, if we're being totally honest. But not from Liverpool, who build themselves up, certainly in the last few years, under these owners. This means more. The anthem of You Never Walk Alone, always looking back to Bill Shankly and socialist values. So I thought it was a shocking decision that they've made. I'm actually delighted now that they've changed their minds. I still think that'll still leave a bitter taste with a lot of Liverpool supporters, because what this did was it saved the club a few £1 million, which was nothing. It cost the taxpayer a few £1 million, which in the grand scheme of things, when you think of the money and different things, is not the biggest amount ever. But it embarrassed Liverpool supporters throughout the country. Manchester United, Man City, Everton supporters, that's also been getting all the time now, almost laughing at Liverpool. And they've embarrassed themselves, embarrassed their own supporters. So I'm delighted that they've changed their mind. They had to change their mind. There's no doubt about that. I'm glad they've saw sense. They've actually made mistakes before, Liverpool's owners, in terms of ticket pricing. There was something where they tried to trademark Liverpool, so local street sellers couldn't sell Liverpool FC gear. And what they've always done, these owners, and credit to them, is when they've made a big mistake, they've pulled back on it. And that was my hope. I was speaking to different people, some people part of the club, really close supporters who were close to the club.
Jamie, let me read you part of the statement that's just come in to me from Peter Moores, which says, it is as a direct result of extensive consultation and our own internal deliberations at various levels throughout the club that we have opted to find alternative means despite our eligibility to apply for the coronavirus job retention scheme. We believe we came to the wrong conclusion last week to announce that we intended to apply for the coronavirus retention scheme and furlough staff due to the suspension of the Premier League football calendar, and are truly sorry for that. Our intentions were, and still are, to ensure the entire workforce is given as much protection as possible from redundancy and or loss of earnings during this unprecedented period. That's part of a lengthy statement by Peter Moore. Gary, is that far more like
Geoff,
the tone?
Well, Geoff, did I just hear then that you said that they're going to be making people redundant?
No. To ensure that they are not.
Oh, okay.
It's their intention.
Well,
I think
not.
No.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Look, picking up on Jamie's point, I mean, I've been speaking to Jamie about this for the last couple of days, and there is no doubt that Liverpool were always going to reverse that decision. I think that I agree with Jamie. They get a lot of things right. They do get some things wrong, as every football club does, every business does. What I would say is, though, it's symptomatic of football's approach in the last 3 weeks that they are not in any way, shape or form capturing the public mood around football and what they need to do. They need to, health and safety, protect their own business, but they need to make sure they set the tone for the whole country in doing good, looking after each other, be kind. All the messages that we're hearing, the Queen last night, football is not performing to the mantra of the country. Football needs to give. Football needs to suffer financially, because it can suffer financially. And the reality of it is there are clubs in the lower leagues and in the non-league that are going to go under here if they don't get propped up from the Premier League. The Premier League is probably in a position to be able to loan £1 billion from somewhere, or an advance from, down the line they'll have to pay it back somewhere. The clubs in the lower league need more money. The causes need good money. They need to do the right thing. And what Liverpool did on Saturday is symptomatic of what the last 3 weeks has been. Lack of leadership, lack of good decision making, lack of clarity, lack of communication. And football is getting this really wrong at the highest level. And it's a structural flaw in the game. There is no single body with an aligned interest.
Gary, it's also being reported right now that Manchester United have told 900 people that none will be put on government furlough scheme and all remain on full pay. That's being reported right now.
Geoff, to be honest with you, what's happened here is, let's be clear, some clubs have dipped the toe. We sat in a Salford City board meeting 10, 15 days ago. We looked at the job retention scheme. It saved us 350 grand over 10 weeks. And we started to think about it. It's quite tempting that at our level. It's a lot of money. It's probably more than 15, 20% of our revenue at the club. But we thought Peter Lim, David Beckham, Ryan Giggs, Gary Neville, nah, can't do that. Can't do that. No, we won't do that. Surely football 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, should have been looking at these things 2 weeks ago, whenever it would have been. The Premier League have regular meetings. They collaborate with the Football League. They collaborate with the PFA, with the LMA. They're just not getting this right, Geoff. And ultimately, they've got an opportunity to do what Liverpool have done. They can still get it right in the next few days. But there needs to be a collective deal from the Premier League that suits all stakeholders in the game. It can't just suit themselves, because the players won't be bullied. The EFL are not going to lie down, and the fans are not going to accept it.
Gary, if the play, okay, go back to the players. We keep saying, and you're saying the Premier League lend £1 billion from somewhere. They're just words. I mean, what does that mean? Where are you going to get £1 billion from? I mean, it goes back to you're talking about what can happen. The players have got to be the one. These clubs, I don't believe that these clubs are making the money that people think they are. And it goes back again to the players, and we've been players, and you're talking about them getting it right or getting it wrong. Some players, we go back to the first answer, they've not got it right from the very start, you said. But it has to be a coming together. Surely where this money comes from is the actual wages, because the actual money that's supposed to be coming in for clubs is not coming in. The revenue streams are not coming in.
Jamie, maybe, look, I'm a club owner, but I also sat on the PFA management committee for 10 years. And my view is that ultimately players will stick together. Players won't be bullied. They're not financial experts, but they're also streetwise, and they are, to be fair, smart when it comes to understanding things.
Well, how are they being bullied?
Well, I think Jamie, look, you were a player, and I'm struggling to understand why you don't think on Friday afternoon, if you were sat at home as the Liverpool captain, and you all of a sudden heard an announcement saying that 30% of your wages were going to be cut for the next 12 months without anybody telling you in person. It was announced in the press. I think you'd be pretty peeved, and I would be. So let's not beat around the bush here. We're poacher term gamekeeper extraordinaire here. I mean, to say that you wouldn't be annoyed with that would be an understatement. You'd feel really let down that wasn't communicated to you in person to allow you to respond.
My problem with it all, and it has been from the very start, and I said this with you when we were at Old Trafford, when we done something with Kelly Dalglish, was there's no way in the world you will get every club doing the same thing. It's impossible. So the fact that 20 captains are on some Skype call, and it's all, they've all then got to go back to their own clubs. Now, there's no way it can be 30% across the board. And of course, if you're a player and someone said 30% of your wages, or forget a player, in any business or industry, that wages are gone, of course you're not happy. But every club's situation will be different. The teams in the lower half of the Premier League, some of them will be very, very close. I actually look at Bournemouth and Everton.
Jamie, look, I'm not quite sure the point that you're making, because you're saying on one hand that you'd be very disappointed to hear that
you keep saying what the Premier League or people should be doing. As Geoff said before, the Premier League is the 20 clubs. It's not some mythical peers in the Premier League. It's the clubs.
Jamie, I believe the players should contribute towards the club's finances from July onwards in particular. I really do. So let's be clear here. I'm not saying the players shouldn't contribute.
What are you actually saying in terms of actually also about there should be one body? There isn't one body. It's easy saying it, but there's not. There's the FA, there's the Premier League, there's the AFL.
No, sorry, the Premier League were the ones who went for a collective agreement with the players of 30% reduction on Friday, not the players. If the Premier League had announced on Friday each club will do its own individual negotiations with the players, then that would have been fine. That's what you're saying. They didn't do. They said they wanted a collective position against the players of 30% reduction across the board. You're right, some clubs might need 40, some clubs might need 10. So my point is, once the Premier League made it about a collective position, the players then had to group together as a collective. Do you not see that?
So, well, guys, Jamie, just 1 second there, because you're going back and forth on a familiar and important point as well. Wayne Rooney wrote a really good column at the weekend, and it follows on the theme of one size does not fit all. Players don't want to be seen to be questioning clubs about or being means tested, but how can players arrive at a number, a percentage which they think is acceptable. And you mentioned you could talk some of the bottom club at Norwich compared to them. Now, what do they take into account? Do they take into account the status of the owner, the status of the outgoings? How do they do this?
Geoff, Gary was involved in this as well. It's certainly not on the scale what we're talking about right now, but about 10 or 15 years ago, there was something from the NHS about nurses not getting enough pay, and Premier League footballers donating I think it was a day's wages to NHS nurses.
I remember it well.
Yeah, so basically, me and Steven Gerrard go into the dressing room, and this was on a club by club basis, if I remember rightly. Me and Steven Gerrard went into the room with other 20 odd players in there, and some players refused to pay. And there was 4 or 5 in our dressing room. I'm sure it was the same dressing rooms up and down the country. A lot of them were foreign players. They couldn't understand what they were paying this money for. Why nurses? Why not something else? I've got my own charities. All these different things that are probably coming up now. I realise it's a lot bigger now. And that's why I said at the very start, you won't get every Premier League club. Everyone's situation is different. Everyone has a different owner. But players within those dressing rooms, as we did then, and it was slightly different and certainly a lot less money that we're talking about right now. And we couldn't all agree within that dressing room, but the majority of us got, if you like, it across the line in our club's perspective, and I'm sure every other club did in some way or another. And I think that's what it's got to go. This is, as I said, there's bigger funds involved. Players are earning much bigger wages now than we're. They're asking to be taking 25-30% of wages, not a day's wages. So it is completely different. But it has to go back to the clubs. And that was my point at the very start. But that, for me, is the only way I see, if clubs are struggling, is that players will have to accept a cut, whether it's 30, whether some clubs is 10, 25, whatever it may be. Because, again, the 3 revenue streams that have stopped, of TV, advertising, people through the gates have stopped. And you can't just expect whether these owners are worth hundreds of millions to be writing out checks for millions of pounds every week just to pay players' wages when the players are getting paid for something that they're not actually doing right now. Now, Gary goes back to, well, if you were a player, you wouldn't like it. Of course I wouldn't. And no player is going to like this, what it's happening right now. But if every player is the same, or every player within a club is the same and doing the same thing, sometimes you have to bite the bullet and accept it.
I mean, the club, so Gary, you'll know, again, with your club owner's hat on, the actual commercial viability of football clubs is clearly at stake here to varying degrees. So they've got to have these conversations. And it's very different going to a player and saying, look, we need to cut your salary because if this continues, we're going out of business here. There's nothing left, nothing in the shop, nothing on the shelves.
Geoff, if I wanted a reduction in wages with the Salford City players, I would communicate with them first, and I would ask them to get representatives that would look at employment law, that would look at financial expertise for them, and I would sit down with their financial experts and their employment law experts, and I would basically show them the club's finances on an open book basis and say, look, we're suffering badly, particularly from July onwards. Can we ask? Because all you can do is ask, by the way. You cannot ask a player to rip up his contract or not pay him, or else you'll be in breach of it. So ultimately, you are requesting some support. There is a way to do that. I wouldn't announce Salford City's pay cuts in the Salford Advertiser on the Friday and then call them to a meeting on the Saturday. That is not the way you do things. So from my point of view, I totally accept that football clubs need to go to their players, either collectively or individually, as Jamie says. Individually might be the way forward if they can't agree in a collective position. I'll come back to why I would push for a collective position if I was in part of the union or if I was a Premier League player in a minute. But going back to it, there is a way to go to your players. You've got to disarm them to start with, to say, look, this is just a request for a meeting. I'd ask you to employ, we'll employ them our cost, an employment lawyer and a finance expert, and we'd like just to show you our books to be able to bring you on the journey with us. You softly land information like this. You can't just do it on a Friday. Now, in terms of my union hat on, as I was a PFA union management committee member, the reason, if I was a Premier League player, and I'm not sure it'll happen, I do agree with Jamie, I think this will end up being individual negotiations, club by club in the end. But the reason that I would fight as a Premier League captain with Jamie, if he was a Premier League captain with me, for a collective bargaining position would be, I would say for the first 3 months, I think it's going to be difficult to get any cuts agreed with the players because of the reasons that some players are out of contract, some players are going to get relegated, some players don't want to do it. However, from July onwards, I think we've got to look at the club's finances because they will suffer economically. I do think we should support the clubs. And the reason that I would go for a 10-15% reduction in wages and agree that with the league would be to protect my lower league colleagues who could be getting asked for 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, where it really matters because they're on 400, 500, 600 quid a week. Now, that's why I, personally, as a Premier League captain, would stand and make sure that I fought not just for my Premier League colleagues, I would fight for my lower league colleagues, my non-league colleagues. I would fight for my non-playing staff members because the players have the power here. The clubs cannot rip up the contracts. They've got to fulfil the contracts. But there is a deal to be done because the clubs need support. But it's got to be done with my opinion, with a little bit more science than just releasing it on a Friday afternoon publicly.
Jamie, part of the PFA statement was very much solidarity. That word was used. And that's what Gary's trying to put forward there as well. Do you accept that that is an important issue here as well in negotiating any pay deferral or indeed cut? Solidarity, realistically, from the top downwards.
Well, that's the most important thing. We've already lost Bury, a club close to Gary's heart. I was actually spoke to a friend of mine, Ryan Lowe's, manager of Plymouth today, in the situation at their club, because I didn't want to just speak about, obviously, I'm in the Liverpool bubble, if you like, and speaking to people through Liverpool, and you want to know what's going on down there, and they are the most important things. I think the problem with the Premier League has been this furlough situation is actually in the lower leagues, you wouldn't just say we'd accept it. It's actually probably a necessity for a lot of clubs, and maybe even with their actual players as well, because you don't want to see teams go on bust, because the money that these clubs now are losing out on there. In the Premier League, it's probably as much about the TV money as anything else, whereas lower down you go, it's probably more about gate receipts, really. So that is the most important thing. And I think Gary mentioned about making sure lower league players, non-league players, also maybe non-playing staff, that has to be a necessity in the Premier League. And that's why I've got no time for any club who put any of their staff on furlough payments. I know some of them are struggling, but I think that should be paid, and it should be, again, going back to the players if they can help in different situations. But as I said, I don't think even Premier League players, whether in negotiations, whether this will take 2 or 3 weeks to find a solution, would in any way want to stop or not help teams lower down. Lots of these players in the Premier League have come from those positions. A lot of these players in the Premier League now will probably manage in these divisions as well. So if you're asking probably what is the most important thing to come out of the coronavirus pandemic and how it's affected football, is actually the fact that no club goes to the wall. And obviously the lower down you go, there's more chance of that happening. As I said, we've seen that this season with Bury.
Do you think that there will be unity amongst owners? I'm just thinking, playing devil's advocate, talking to 2 former players here. Any club owners in these negotiations saying, look, understand what you're saying about going forward, understand what you're saying about the football pyramid, but right now, this club, our club, is hemorrhaging money, and we are fighting for our survival. Is this the time to renegotiate those allowances, those rules?
The football club chairmen are the ones that have signed the contracts, Geoff. They're the ones that have given the players the money. There's no player ever walked into a Premier League chairman's office and said, you must give me that contract and you must put that number in. So let's be clear here. The owners knew what they were doing. They're sensible. There's some of the biggest and best businessmen in the world run Premier League clubs. Let's not start feeling sorry for them because they've signed contracts that they now can't fulfill. What I do have real sympathy with them on is that this is unprecedented. It's an economic tragedy as well as a health tragedy. And they would be reasonable in asking their players for support. However, there is a way to go about it. And I'll give you an example that I heard the other day from a player. If you've bought a football club for 250, 300 million pounds, take Liverpool, and now it's worth 2.6 billion or 2 billion, and they sell it in 5 years for 2 billion, and they make 1.7 billion pounds profit, but they had to put an extra 50 million in or 30 million in these next few months to subsidise the losses. Is that really a hardship? That's one end of the story. Then there is the other end of the story, which are the clubs who, to be fair, haven't got the super wealthy owners, where the clubs aren't worth more than they paid for it. The lower league clubs will need to furlough all their non-playing staff and playing staff. They will need to do it to survive, and they should do it, and they should be supported in doing it because they need that income and they need that job retention scheme relief. However, there are clubs at the top of the league who, to be fair, from a point of view of do they need it, it's a nice to have, but they didn't need it. And you talk about sort of the wealthy owners of the Premier League clubs. I do think the players should support, but I think the way in which the whole thing's been handled from day one, 3-4 weeks ago, has been a mess. I don't think it's been quick enough. I think ultimately it just shows the lack of leadership that we've got in football at the moment to come together and, as I say, capture the mood of the country.
But
They're
Gary,
not capturing the mood of the country.
Absolutely, Gary. We have to apply a perspective at all times. Right? At the very top, we talked about the sad loss that Pep Guardiola has suffered today. That's the reality of the situation. That is what is happening. So this is very, very secondary. But by the same token, football is a business and has to try and get its house in order. It's like criticism of clubs talking about what to do when football starts playing again. We don't know when it's going to happen. But at the same time, clubs, like all businesses, can't just sit around and wait for lockdown to finish and everything go back to normal. They've got to try and come up with some contingency plans. Okay, we've covered what has happened, how it's been said, and the mistakes been made there. What has to happen now from both? And I'll start with you first, Jamie. What do you believe has to happen now in order for this situation to be resolved and for football to move forwards?
Well, I think first of all, this players thing, I said earlier on, this probably needs to be sorted in the next week or so. Gary's, I think, probably mentioned that it wasn't done quickly enough at the start, but I think last week you were talking about that you can't expect players to do this so quickly. So there has to be there's no time frame. I think forget this thing of 20 Premier League clubs doing the same thing. That is not going to happen. Yes, everyone is in this situation in some ways together, but also every club will be looking at their own finances and looking after their own situation. Some will furlough, some won't. Liverpool have changed their mind. Spurs or Newcastle won't change their mind. There will be other clubs doing it as well in the next few weeks, so they have to look after their own. But I think the main thing right now is to make sure the football clubs right throughout the country, but certainly the Premier League, is that what we're talking about, make sure that nothing really serious can happen financially. And again, people may not believe it's the Premier League and the money. When I speak to people, I'm sure Gary's speaking to people at different clubs, there are clubs who this is going to really hurt when they come out the other side of this. So I think the main thing is clubs, get your own house sorted with your own players and come to some sort of agreement. Gary's mentioning about players maybe being out of contract, some players maybe at different ages. There's lots of different things involved in it. But every club in some way has got to come and make an agreement. And in some ways, look after themselves. Some clubs may need more money. Some clubs may need less money. Really, I think that's the first thing, really, to make sure the clubs from the top of the Premier League to the bottom of the AFL are basically structured right and can be looked after in these next few months. And then, and only then you can start thinking, okay, football can start then we can get it going. Whenever obviously the health situation is a lot better situation than we're in right now.
Gary, just putting finance to one side for a second, fans are obviously emotionally invested in their football clubs. To what degree do you think they will judge their own football clubs with the club's conduct during this period?
I think they will judge their own football clubs. I think Jamie said that before. He was obviously ferocious in his criticism of Liverpool and how they handled it over the weekend, and obviously then they've reversed their decision. So I think you understand how a fan would look at a football club. From a Manchester United point of view, I'm a Manchester United fan. I'm so disappointed. I'm disappointed it's taken 3 weeks for Manchester United to come out with what would be a meaningful statement. I think Manchester United, to me, the most famous club in the world, the biggest club in the Premier League from revenue point of view, should be setting the tone, should be pioneering, should be leading from the front. And I'm not sure that I've seen that yet, but maybe it will come. But if you ask me the question that you asked Jamie before about what football can do, it can create a deal that would be suitable and palatable to all stakeholders so that they can get on with it. The second thing would be to change the direction of the mood towards footballers, football and the Premier League in general. And just simple things. You talk about the fans, Geoff. And look, there have been some players who have done things over this sort of last 3 weeks whilst we've been in lockdown. But I'd love to see a fitness session from a Premier League fitness coach with 5 Premier League players from that club. I'd love to see Jurgen Klopp doing a fitness session every day with James Milner, with Mo Salah, with Firmino. I'd love to see Harry Maguire do one with Rashford and Pogba, Martial. I'd love the fans to be able to join in with that session. I'd love there to be some connection between the players, the clubs, the fans, the people who support the game, who love the game, the heroes to everybody. They're not even doing the simple things well. I've seen I thought James Milner do something the other week where he did a 4-4-2 formation with different things in his house. It was really nice to see. I saw Sergio Aguero playing in the garden with his child, doing some skills. But there are such simple things. I see all the chefs on television, all the singers doing listening parties for albums. I see all the chefs doing cooking demonstrations. Why aren't football players connecting with the fans? Why aren't we seeing content every day, simple content that could be thrown out there into our homes that would lift people that are going through difficult times, whether it be through health, whether it be through mental health, whether it be through difficulties of childcare and looking after vulnerable people? Surely there's better ways and simple ways of doing this than basically being at each other's throats, which is what football looks like it's been for the last 4 or 5 days, slow in reacting, being at each other's throats, not being able to get to a collective agreement, can't agree, because they're reversing decisions that they're making publicly that's making them look silly, and they're not even connecting with the fans in a way in which I believe they should be at this moment in time either. So there's many things that could happen. There's lots of time still to do it. So football can change the direction of travel in respect to the mood that the country's in, but they'll have to do it quickly.
Well, it's that sense of community, that sense of compassion. Gary mentioned some of the things that have gone out. One of the first was Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain and his girlfriend Jamie. Fantastic, and just lifted the mood of everybody. For instance, we're showing old games, and a bit of nostalgia takes people's minds off it. It's all about perspective. Yes, of course, right now, when you talk about who's been the best right back in the Premier League this season, it feels completely irrelevant. But at the same time, people aren't tuning in to us to get the latest advice from the government on the situation. It's relief. And that I think this period, and football certainly is no exception, all of us, everybody will look back and say, during that period, what did you do to help? Did you do the maximum you can to help? And it's different for individuals, and I'm totally against accusing people and going after people saying, did you do this, did you do that? It's entirely an individual thing. Different people can afford to help in different ways, and also, unfortunately, a large number of people desperately need to help. They can't help anybody themselves because they desperately need it. Football, like society, needs to look at itself individually and say, this is what we did during that difficult time.
Yeah, it is, and I said before, it was an opportunity for players, but you talk about the game in general, and Gary's talking about content, and we're always on group chats together, thinking of ideas and what we can do. Because as I said, it's not just to put something out there for other people, which is great. Sometimes it's for your own sense of getting up and feeling like there's something to do. Obviously, the situation when we all have to stay indoors. I mean, Gary's mentioning players doing things. I think individually, yeah, but it's difficult for getting groups of players together. Now we know the health restrictions on everyone and about people being indoors, so it's not easy. But yes, I can agree. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, sometimes you do something yourself at home. I think Gary a couple of weeks ago got his hair cut by one of his kids, and that it's funny. It's something different. People are watching it. It went well in the end.
That's another statement. It's hilarious.
Yeah, but what I mean is,
Carragher, can you shave? Can you shave, please? Just smarten yourself up a little bit. You're on Sky Sports here.
I know. I mean, it can't be worse than that little Van Dijk you had for about 10 years when you were captain of Man United. But I'm just trying different things. I've said to the kids, let's just try things and do different things while we're off, or certainly
can we have a live haircut? Can we have a live haircut at 7:30 by your kids, please, on on Instagram?
Well, I'm actually going to put a vote out tonight. Should the beard stay or go? What's the verdict?
Stay.
Stay.
Oh, okay. Stay. Yeah. Stay.
Yeah, but what I was getting back to,
you got all John Bishop on us.
Yeah. No, but I mean, you're talking about social media and putting things on because of the situation that we're in, and even when we start these shows, the first thing you say is, or we all say, is football's not the most important, the health and safety, and rightly so. And sometimes with social media now, and Gary, some old players doing different things, sometimes you're a little bit, you worry about because of the situation that we're in. Could you make a joke of something, or is something okay to laugh at, or is it okay to talk about how much we miss football and how desperate you are to get football back on, TV, or people going to the games? Because, as I said, you certainly don't want to upset no one. As I said, we know some of the issues that we talk about and joke about are not the most serious, but it's vitally important in our life. And I get what Gary's saying in terms of whether putting stuff out there, celebrities or footballers, and giving people a lift. It's also about, as I said, giving yourself a lift and something to do. But I think a lot of time, players certainly, I read something through the week that players were told to be very careful putting things on social media or showing the houses off or how big the gardens are, because that way, in some ways, it might knock people's morale who are not in such a privileged situation. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not sure, but I certainly read that. So it's not easy, I think, for possibly even ourselves when we're doing shows to get the right tone, and certainly for footballers as well, because right now you just got to be so careful that you maybe don't cross a line or maybe upset anyone in any way.
Okay, I would echo those sentiments, Carragher. We can only do our best, but trust me, Gary having his haircut definitely gave many people a lift, and the results even more so.
That looks like a very expensive picture in the background. I'd like to know what year it was, Gary. 19 what?
It's 1980. It's a David Bowie.
Oh yeah.
That's from the Scary Monsters album, isn't it? That's the Ashes to Ashes period.
You can imagine David Bowie, can't you, in the very, very social club. Very, very Berry that for you, Gary.
He was a Bromley boy, I'll have you know. Right, guys, listen, stay safe, stay well. Thank you for your time this evening, and no doubt that we will talk soon. All the best to both of you.
Thank you.
Cheers, Geoff.